Security guards, what's your creepiest/scariest story? I've worked security on and off for several years to supplement my income, so I've heard quite a few creepy stories from coworkers. Probably the most legitimately scary story I've heard was from a guard that was working in a closed-down arena. The building is more than 100 years old but hasn't been used since the early 2000s. The city is keeping up with basic maintenance as it waits for a buyer. There's usually one guard assigned to the building. It's a 6,000-seat arena with a huge basement and 2 additional floors that have lots of old office spaces, dressing rooms and a separate, smaller community theater-type stage that's upstairs. The usual guard is doing his rounds through the building. The building itself is very interesting, as it's largely unchanged since the heydays of the 70s and 80s. The upper floors are largely dark and are pretty creepy. Anyway, the guard is doing his normal rounds but feels unnaturally creeped out. It's his normal post but something feels different today. He's feeling jumpy but shakes it off and continues. He's a very diligent guy, so he walks every floor of the building. He's in the very top of the catwalk system above the main arena where the old spotlighting equipment was. It's a narrow wooden catwalk system. Suddenly he hears a loud creak behind him, like someone is walking. He spins around and sees a guy standing there. The guy's is frozen mid-stride like he's been tiptoeing up behind him. Guy has an unsettling mischievous-looking smile on his face like he's been caught with his hand in a cookie jar. Dude has a big steel pipe in his hand instead of a cookie though. Guard pulls his gun and guy takes off running in the opposite direction and disappears into the labyrinth of the building. Cops come and sweep the building with a canine but don't find him. They do find that he's been playing in the dust that's on top of the old concession counters. He had written a bunch of bizarre helter-skelter type unsettling rhymes and drew a bunch of stick figures hanging from nooses. The speculation is it was some crazy homeless guy that had been hiding in the building a few days and had made a game of following the guards without them knowing it. I saw the writing still on the counters the last time I was there. Once we had a seemingly homeless guy crawl into a crawl space trying to hide in our casino. He suffocated and we found his body 5 days later after a smell and biomatter had appeared on one side of the wall. I was doing security in a hospital at the time, decided to do the basement patrol with a flashlight for funsies. I was sweeping the light into the offices when I saw a semi-transparent man staring back at me from inside one of the rooms. Well, I nearly shit myself before I realized I had caught my own reflection in the glass because of the flashlight. One night back when I was staying with my mother, I was walking down the darkened hallway to the room I was staying in. In the deep gloom I thought the door to my room was open, with the room itself in deep dark. As I neared the doorway a human form suddenly appeared in front of me. I cried out and jumped a foot, and cocked a fist, thinking someone had materialized into the apartment somehow, without any of us being aware of it. It turned out the door to my room was actually shut, and all I was seeing was my own shadow being cast against the door by the faint light from the living room behind me. It sounds silly, but if I'd had a heart condition it would have killed me. I literally thought an unaccountable person was suddenly standing about 2 feet in front of me and quickly getting closer. Had a young female commit suicide in her car in the parking lot of a Harley-Davidson shop in the middle of the night. Years and other jobs later, I took new job and was seated next to a guy who turned out to be the boyfriend of the girl at the time. They were newly dating and he never understood what happened. I could tell the weight of it was still very much on his shoulders. I was able to confirm details as to what happened and answer questions. 2 weeks later my previous job called and begged me back. I worked there long enough to run into this guy, share the story and set him closer to peace, then left and went back to my old job. Fate. Edit. I'll never forget sliding back in my chair to say, "Hey, I didn't mean to overhear you. But were you just talking to a co-worker about losing a GF near a HD dealer in the past?" I was still new and hadn't even talked to him yet. One night I was passing by a playground park at around 3 a.m. and spotted an adult male and what appeared to be a kid 5 to 6 years of ages, both swinging in total silence on them swings you have for children. It was cold/rainy and both of them were poorly clothed for this type of year and especially weather. Didn't seem homeless though. Pretty unusual stuff to do at 3 a.m. with a kid, you would say. I had lots of different things cross my mind at moment, so decided to take a closer look since I thought I was tripping. As soon as I got close enough for them to see me, still far from them, they just stared at me for a brief second and started running as fast they could, again without a single word spoken or voice/sound being made. Not sure where they ran because I had to scratch my eyes for a second time to check if I was asleep or not. It isn't creepy/scary as the other stories in the comments, but it was definitely a what bruh moment for me. My dad had a job going around and checking schools to make sure everything was properly alarmed, locked down during summer breaks. Had about 15 to 20 on his list and would try to bang them out all in an evening so he could have the next few days off. Told me that one of the schools was a Catholic elementary school, very rundown and old, always gave him the creeps. There was a room in there that had a big Virgin Mary statue and it made him feel uncomfortable whenever he'd check in there, so he never spent much time hanging around that room. The last year he did that as a job, upon closer inspection, he discovered that the statue was actually hollow, so it could be moved around easier, presumably, and also that the eyes of the statue had small drill holes in them, so someone could hypothetically hide inside and watch people without them knowing. To this day that's what he speculates was happening when he'd be in there. Kinda far out there if you ask me, but FCK it's creepy as hell to consider lol. My dad used to work security guard jobs after he retired because he could. He was on site overnight shift at a paper mill here in Oregon that's part of a small town and is at the edge of the Cascades. He noticed over the course of about 3 nights that all of a sudden all of the little critters he was used to seeing in the lumberyard were just gone. It was weird, and quiet, and he was about to set out on his rounds when something made him pause and take a big step backwards into the cover of the guard shack. It's a good thing, too, because the great horned owl's talons missed his head by about 6 inches. Those birds are big, and they're so territorial. Dad said they stuck around just long enough to kill every living thing under about 30 pounds in the area, and then they moved on. Used to work at a hospital that was mainly used for mental health. It had fully secured floors and it was our job to control combative patients. Many patients were waiting for felony trials, so lots of stories. The worst was we did a welfare check on a vehicle in our ER parking lot. They had been sitting there around an hour or so. The guy inside the car wasn't responding to our attempts to get his attention. Open his car door up and he was trying to dig his own foot off with a flathead screwdriver. He had gotten all the way down to the ankle bones on one whole side. We had to wrestle him into the ER as he was on a ton of meth. Seeing the ankle like that in the guy's almost feral-like state was like something out of a zombie movie. Got a call on the radio about something happening in the bathroom of our main building as there was a crowd forming. My brother and I approached the scene on foot since we were a walking distance away. We walked into the bathroom and I could see 2 very pale, blue-veined legs in one of the stalls. A man died on the toilet, his wife and kids were there, and apparently the last thing the woman said to her husband was, "Could you hurry it up, you're slowing us down." It was one thing to see the body and another to see the look on the kids' faces when they found out. I was working at a medium-sized radiator factory. It required a foot patrol every 2 hours and a CCTV patrol every hour in between. It was a Friday night shift and the factory was shut down for maintenance one weekend, so I was told that the engineers would shut the compressed air system down before leaving. Normally my task at once the last shift engineers left. It got to around midnight and I had just finished patrolling the offices and entered the factory floor. All the lights were off, so it was just me, my torch and a bank of amber safety lights on top of various presses, welders etc. As I walked down the side of the factory line there was this almighty hissing noise which came from the direction of the air compressor shed. Needless to say my pants went from black to brown. The engineers hadn't shut down the system as stated and a pressure relief valve decided to open. Had a great time writing up my near-miss report because, as you know, pressurized manufacturing equipment is dangerous. About 15 years ago, I was a guard at a pastry manufacturing plant. At night it was a cold, creepy place filled with weird machinery and is very much in a really bad part of town. There was a catwalk above some machines that lead to offices, with a long metal staircase. Around the beginning of this staircase was a metal cage with a gate I had the key to. Nobody else was there. Up on the catwalk there were hooks with lab coats, 3 coats with 5 hooks. All were hung on the side where the catwalk met the stairs, so the far 2 hooks were empty. After I made my round this night I came back and noticed 1 coat moved from the middle hook to the far hook. I unlocked the gate, closed and locked it behind me to check the offices. This was about 8 p.m. and the last of the employees had left, but I figured maybe one returned. Catwalk was empty, and so are the offices. There was no other way down. So now I'm a little freaked out, but I figure it's just my mind. So I go back down, lock the gate, and head to the lounge area. The next round is done and the coats are moved, each hanging on an alternating hook. Now I'm a little pissed thinking someone is definitely messing with me. Back up to the catwalk. Empty. Check the offices. Empty. Lock the gate and check the back and front doors, they are all locked shut. Alarm is on. I go back to the lounge and lock myself in there. Whatever was going on. Check the monitors we had, nothing. Every time I did a round, the coats changed. I actually stopped doing rounds, and figured if they want to fire me, I don't care. I got a new assignment after that and never went back. I asked other guards who had that assignment and was told that weird things did indeed happen there with no explanation. I used to patrol at night for a school district and one night we got a call from dispatch that there were some kids at the school that called them saying they were there and that they should send a guard. It seemed off since why would they self-incriminate that they were trespassing? Regardless, they told me to go check. While about halfway there my supervisor tells me over the radio to not go and that he'll take my call. I stop into a gas station for some snacks and am sitting in the car when he gives me an update. My supervisor contacted the police and arrived with them. They found the kids hiding in the bushes with knives ready to ambush me. They were arrested, but I couldn't help but think what could have happened had my supervisor not intervened, and it was shortly after that I decided to pursue a new line of work. Not exactly a security guard but a soldier, and I don't know if that counts, but I once guarded an entrance to a military base alone maybe 3 months after I was recruited and was greeted by a bunch of wolves/hyenas or something else along the lines. It was about 1 to 2 a.m. and I started hearing a lot of noises, went to check it out with my rifle, my walkie-talkie and my flashlight. It seemed that one of the, let's call them wolves even though I'm 99% sure they weren't wolves, killed the other one and then started to howl, and in seconds I started hearing howls and sound of dogs crying and yelling around me. Suddenly I see the wolf that killed the other one walking towards me and looking directly in my eyes. He wasn't alone, he walked with about 5 others all coming to me. In addition, I was surrounded but they were the only ones coming towards me. So naturally I started making noises and throwing rocks at them, but it didn't really bother them. So at one point they were way too close for comfort, so I dropped my walkie-talkie and loaded my rifle and was about to shoot. My heart was beating the fastest it ever did my whole life, and I start yelling at them and stomping the ground with hopes that maybe this time it will work, and it did, and they left. I'm sure I would have shit myself. There's nothing scarier than an animal with large teeth bearing down at slow pace. I used to read meters for the electric company and got a surprise once that way. Walked around the back of a house, through a fence gate, because we're allowed/supposed to, and noticed a dog run. But it was empty. Kept walking to the meter, past the deck, and heard the sound of a chained dog collar ringing. Rottweiler on the deck, whose head was the same height as my crotch, walking down the stairs towards me. Not a friendly walk, and a low growl started. The company gave us what they called dog sticks, collapsible steel batons, for such occasions. Now, I love dogs, just prefer cats, and I'd never met a dog that scared me and couldn't be warned off with a loud voice, so I couldn't imagine ever needing that. This one couldn't have cared less how loud I got, and once he got about 10 feet away, started a rapid chattering bark and started to lunge. I already had my hand on the dog stick and I snapped it to full length. That sound stopped him right there, and I continued backing through the wooden gate, and the instant it latched, he jumped at it. I saw it give a bit but it didn't open. I just got back in my truck and marked that the meter was inaccessible. I can't imagine what you were feeling, but good on you for not shooting. My mom used to work security at a site of an old factory that was due to be demolished to be turned into a new housing development. All the guards, including my mom, reported hearing sounds of people talking while on patrol, but whenever they arrived at the place they thought the voices were coming from, there would be no one there. One night my mom arrived for her shift and the guard she was relieving ran out the door the second she arrived. My mom ran after him and caught up with him at his car. He was visibly shaking and he told her that he heard the voices again, but this time he saw what looked like a man and a woman on their smoke break chatting. He approached them to ask what they were doing there and both disappeared when he got to within 15 feet of them. The guard refused to go back to that site afterwards and got transferred to another site. I've told this story on Reddit before, but I work at a theme park that is also a zoo, and because the park is very conservation and animal focused, the animals are given a lot of freedom. One of the animals we have is gorillas. Due to the aforementioned freedom, the animals are not confined to their sleeping areas during park close. They are allowed to roam a larger open area. It is a common occurrence that overnight, the gorillas would just leave their enclosure. They had figured out the way the door worked and, even though this is a multi-billion-dollar company, they didn't replace the locks until a couple years ago when COVID kicked off. Being a night security guard is not that bad. Until you're staring down an 800-pound gorilla. Luckily, the gorilla didn't see me, and I was able to call into the overnight animal keepers who responded with, "Oh yeah, that happens. Just stay away and we will come out to meet you in a second." Great, I'll just be over here, changing my pants. I love my job, but that night I almost quit. One of the buildings on our contract was an old police station. It was a large metro police headquarters with multiple floors, all abandoned and waiting demolition. I was exploring the cell blocks. It was creepy as hell because many of the lights didn't work, so it's pretty much just me and my flashlight beam. Suddenly I hear this shrill old-fashioned telephone type ringing. I freeze and my first thought is that it's an old-fashioned doorbell buzzer. So then I think, who in the hell is in this deserted cell block with me and what buzzer are they pressing? In the span of a couple seconds I'm imaging the ghost of some murdered inmate pressing a buzzer so the guards will let him into the day room. Then I figured out it was the company cell phone that was ringing in my back pocket. I'd never had anyone call it before and thus didn't have any idea what the ringtone was. Had a good laugh but then decided I'd done enough exploring and left. Used to work security in hospitals. Some were for psychiatric patients. Some for addicts. Some for the good old sick and injured. One night I was working at a hospital with psychiatry when the alarm goes off for the third floor. Big alarm. Usually for aggression. I sprinted up the stairs and came to a room with two nurses outside, sobbing and screaming. Went inside and the patient had hung herself from the open window with a belt if I remember correctly. Could have been some bed sheets as well, it's been a while. She made sure she couldn't reach the windowsill when she hanged herself and had taken some meds to interrupt the reflex to save yourself. My first instinct was to try and lift her up. She dropped on my butt. She was very light. When she falls over my shoulder I hear a sigh, so I shout that she's still breathing. Everyone rushes in, CPR gets started and an ambulance is called to take her to a hospital with an emergency ward. She survives. Next day she trashes the emergency ward of another hospital I work at and gets kicked out, so yeah. You win some you lose some. Edit, come to think of it. Minors near the end of puberty. At the age of 15 to 18 years old. Had to restrain some of them because they were aggressive. Some of them are beasts because their hormones are all out of control. I'm not a lightweight either, so had to be careful not to hurt them without giving them room to hurt me. Hurting a minor was always bad news even if they attack you first. I worked as a guard in the forensics unit of a psychiatric facility a couple years back. We had a patient get violent and had to bring her to a seclusion room. In retaliation she tried to cut her wrist with her long nails. She just kept scratching and scratching. We had to go back in and hold her down until she was calm again while the nurses rendered aid. It was the bloodiest mess I've seen so far. My brother worked in concrete cutting for years. One of his friends cut the tip of his finger off. Think from the beginning of the nail to the end of his finger. It was a decent chunk. They tended to the wound and got him to the hospital. Before he left in the ambulance he told my brother to take the finger back to his house and put it in a bottle of alcohol in the hopes that it would preserve it. Sure enough, dude never asked for his finger back and my brother had it in a bottle of vodka for like 15 years. His dad, a huge alcoholic, was living with him for a bit. My brother refused to buy alcohol for him. His dad drank the vodka with the guy's finger in it from 15 years ago. Left the finger in there and my brother refilled it with vodka and kept it until he died about 7 years later. Totally insane story, I doubt anyone believes it. I am not and never been a security guard, but I remember one time. I was closing the store with my boss, we locked the front door as we closed and cleaned. This was late at night, well, near my end our shift, we heard scratching at our store's front door. It is a glass door, an automatic slider, but as I said, it was locked. We originally shrugged it off as I'm animal or tweaker, that was until we finished cleaning. My manager heard scratching at the back door, but it can't be opened from the outside. Someone or something was trying to get in, the scratching was violent and near the lower part of the door. He was back there finishing up an inventory check as it all happened, he shouted at whoever it was. Basically leave or we are calling the cops stuff. The scratching stopped right after that and he made sure the door was locked from the inside too, by procedure. Well, he also opened the door to look around. He saw no one nor anything, but claw marks where the scratching was. Animals are not uncommon in the area, but stray dogs, cats, and such. Normal stuff. These claw marks were not normal, not our normal at least. He came up front, where I was putting cleaning stuff away. I was at our main checkout area, next to the front door. Asked what happened, as he told me. We heard a loud scratching sound at the front door again. But we both turned pale as we saw a human-like hand with claws, at the door and two eyes. Reflective, I was young and actually quite strong. Manager is a shorter and smaller guy, Bai also older. He called the cops and we didn't leave till the cops were at our door. The officer escorted us to our rides and as we left, he followed us. Even the cops saw this. As we were pulled out of the driveway in a line, we saw a human-like head, peeking at us from the bottom of building's corner. We all pulled out and stopped at a nearby gas station. Cop confirmed what we saw and he had some other cops drive by. They looked around. Despite what we saw and what cameras saw, we still don't know WTF it was. The officer is pretty sure it was a prank, because he went around the area and asked anyone with cameras facing our store for possible footage. Nothing. Didn't ever happen again. So I did patrols for a business district in my city. 4 buildings about 20 floors or so each. You have one partner at the desk watching CCTV and one who patrols all buildings, then they switch. Anyways, it was like 3 AM, I'm on patrol. All buildings are basically locked tight. I check to make sure each door on each floor is locked, then check the stairwell. Can be really spooky since it's late, dark, and you're alone. Anyways, I was on the like 12th floor or something, open the stairwell door and there's just a dude there. Didn't look homeless, he had a sleeping bag. I escort him out of the building, no fuss, but he also didn't say a word. No idea how he got in. My partner told me he ran into him in the same way once before. I worked as an overnight security guard back in 2007 for an electronics manufacturing company. They had 4 large warehouses that I checked throughout the night. Only one of the warehouses was used for production and also contained the C-suites. They did have 1 or 2 employees there overnight, but it wasn't unusual for me to not see them during a shift. As I was walking through the offices and C-suites, I checked every door to make sure they were locked. They also had some supply closets that I checked as well, but they didn't need to be locked. So I'm going along checking each door and opening each closet. I pull open a closet door and a man on the floor sits up. I screamed. And immediately slammed the door. My entire body was shaking with adrenaline. After just a second I realize he must be an employee, so I open the door again to see why he's in there. Apparently he's a diabetic and sometimes lays down somewhere quiet and out of the way when he doesn't feel good. I still thought it was a strange place to lay down, but that has to have been the scariest moment I had. I'm a woman guard. I was working overnight in a huge steel plant surrounded by woods. One maintenance guy was also working. Just us 2 in the whole place. He came up to me and said, "You are so bright and cheerful. I could just hog tie you and drag you off to the woods." He was joking around, but it was pretty creepy and scary since we were the only 2 there. I work inside a guard shack at a factory. My job is to check people in and be in control of the gates. There's windows facing pretty much every angle, as well as cameras. If someone tries to walk up to the guard shack, I'll be able to see them way before they even get close. One day, the factory was closed for a holiday, so I was completely alone all day. I randomly heard a human knock on the glass, like someone knocking with their knuckles. I look up and see nobody. I glance up at the monitors, nothing. I quickly step outside expecting to see someone. Nope, nothing. Not a single vehicle or person within miles. In my early 20s I worked as a contract concierge, about 15 years ago. One night I called out at work because I hated working at this particular building. The residents were always upset about something. The building was basically falling apart because it was old and, from what I understood, the HOA was dishonest and lazy with upkeep. Anywho, the last night I worked the AC went out. I called the site manager to let him know what was going on. He was very rude and wanted me to write a statement summarizing everything that happened during the night. Odd to me, but okay. The residents were calling and coming down to the desk being rude. I worked overnight, which didn't make things any easier because I was by myself. I was so frustrated as to how the site manager handled the situation. I'm not a maintenance person. The next night I call out and never went back. When I spoke to the scheduler about that night, I told him I wouldn't be returning to that building. He told me it was a good thing I called out because the guy who took my shift received a call during the night to check a unit for whatever reason. He eventually had to get the master key to open the door to the unit and the resident hanged himself in the shower. I hope the guy who took my shift is alright. Never heard anything. I would be terrified. The company I worked for did not renew their contract with this building. I quit shortly after that. In 2015, there was a news story about a building I also worked with during that time. I did enjoy working at this building. It was on the same street a couple of miles away. The top floor of the parking garage collapsed through all 7 levels. Employees had to park on the 7th floor and I always parked on the opposite side next to the pool. Thankfully, no one was hurt. According to the article, residents said dirt and debris from the pool renovation was placed in same spot where the collapse occurred. Do remember thinking something like this could happen because the concrete looked a bit thin to me. The condominiums only being 14 years old at the time was also concerning. I'm no structural engineer. This doesn't really fit the question. Lol. But, I thought it was be cool to share. Not very creepy. I was retired but started getting a bit bored, so I took a security job I love. Overnight security / water quality monitor at a marine mammal research center. We have dolphins, exotic birds, stingrays, sea lions, all sizes turtles. The ones that can be rehabbed and released, the others, we care for them forever. Creepiest thing that happened was one night an armadillo came waddling in from my office on the building's front porch. Tried getting its attention but he was busy just doing armadillo stuff. Paid me no mind at all. Oh. Another night a big snake came at me when I was locking the front gate. Our place is on a fairly secluded bayou. I keep you all posted if something weird happens. Not a security guard, but my mom was and I'd go to work with her. It was a huge building, and after everyone left we would go through and turn off lights and make sure doors were locked. There was a few suicides in the building and we had issues in the areas where they happened. One was a hallway and you'd see a shadow go over the security camera and it would turn green for a while then go back to normal. The other was a stairwell and after we turned off the lights we'd get back to the office and on the camera the light would be back on. No other light switches for that area and we would know if anyone was in the building cause they had to check in and check out with my mom. Not a security guard but was acting as the safety guy for a construction project during the night shift. I was in rural North Wisconsin sitting on the tailgate of my truck eating a couple snacks between radio checks and saw a pretty big coyote or dog or something just hanging out in the middle of the road between our laydown yard and us. It happened pretty often cause we would do barbecue for lunch and drop the scraps in the field. It was a little brightened out because it was a full moon so I could see outlines really well. This coyote stood up. Like on its legs straight up for like a minute. Then it got back down on its legs and walked away. I'd quiet but it put such a sense of fear in me that I got in my truck and drove under our work light. I'm not superstitious but that felt not right. Okay, I hate to be that guy to comment that wasn't actually a security guard, but, when I was in my senior year in high school I was pretty much the one that came in to run all the little random events at our school's theater. I was the one entrusted with the key and made sure everyone was out of the building at the end of the event before locking up. There's always been the whole school urban legend of a ghost named Thurber that haunted the theater, though it was never something I gave much thought to. Just more like a Murphy's Law thing and anytime something went wrong we just tongue-in-cheek blamed Thurber, or at least that was the impression I got. But then one night, as I was walking up the aisle to the exit after checking everything and turning everything off, I hear someone making a mad dash across the catwalk above the stage. I could see the catwalk from where I was and I'm hearing the steps and seeing this way, but can't see anyone. But hey, it's pretty dark up there so whatevs. At this time there was no legitimate reason for anyone to be up there, and every student that was involved in the production I had personally made sure had already left. I had even already gone up there and checked the catwalk already. It was actually the last thing I had done. But my initial reaction was just assuming one of my classmates was around up there and or something, so I started back to the only staircase that went up there and waited a minute to see if someone was coming down because I hate heights and really didn't want to go back up there if I didn't have to. Finally, after no one coming down or replying to my hello, who's up there? I reluctantly start climbing the stairs. At the top I still don't see anyone at all, and I even walk all the way across the catwalk. Look down on both sides, and walk back. Nothing. Not a sign of life. Nothing. At this point I guess I was just in a state of slight shock, maybe denial, and just laughed it off and said okay, Thurber, locked up and left. Said something about it to my teacher the next Monday and she said, yup, that's him. Does it to me all the time. So this was about 10 years ago, but I worked graves, which I actually like because everything's dead and work's generally pretty easy and chill. Now this is normally no big deal, but the lights in the building are on timers so they're mostly all off at night, and I was walking around in a building I didn't typically patrol very much, so I didn't know it like I know most other spaces. But the layout of the building had it so that the halls ended slightly after you could turn the corner to continue your loop around the offices, so people sometimes put things at the end in that small space as decorations, but I was going past one of the corners where seemingly the one light in the area that would have been on at night had burned out, so I couldn't see well, but I felt like checking out the space to see if anyone put up anything cool. It's normally just like pictures or a plant or something. But I looked over to this small space and I see a figure standing there staring me dead in the face and I jumped back letting out a brief, loud AHHH. Before my brain caught up with my reflexes 2 seconds later and realized it was a life-size cardboard cutout of Austin Powers. Guy told me he was going to use my glasses to stab out my eyes and that I should be careful dealing with guys like him because you never see them coming. Went to save the footage on our camera system and the cameras were in fact down due to an unrelated reason, so he could just murdered me and nobody would have seen that shit. Oh, I got one. I got a call one night to a funeral home, multi-alarm in several rooms. Meaning several sensors were going off all over the place repeatedly. I arrive at the site and head on in. Keep in mind this is at about 2 a.m. peak haunting hours. I call the alarm monitoring company and they say the sensors are going off in the morgue. Well, ain't that just dandy? So I make my way there and I find the door cracked open. I open the door and there's a corpse on the table in the middle of the room mid-embalming. I turn on the light and walk around, I see nothing. Then, when I'm on the opposite side of the room, the corpse wheezes. I turn around and it's looking right at me. Panic ensues, a standing bag holder thing falls over. I'm frozen in sheer terror. Then I saw something small run out the door. I reported it. We got onto the owners through their after hours number. So the story behind this was, the person doing the embalming was working late but she suddenly felt sick, too sick to work, so she left. Thing is she felt so sick that she left the corpse on the table. Her plan was to run home, take some medicine and come back, but that didn't pan out as she wound up hunched over her toilet at home puking her guts out, and she left a window cracked open to lay the corpse smell out and didn't close it cause she was so focused on what she was doing. A couple hours after she left a cat got in. I figure it hid from me at first and in its escape it must have run over the corpse's chest, pushing out what air was in their lungs, making them wheeze, which must have either made their head tilt or the cat kicked it while running away and it knocked over the bag stand thing. Anyway, I covered the corpse back up, sealed the window, couldn't find any sign of the cat so figured it got out and reset the alarm. Thankfully it didn't go off again. Bouncer at a large brewery that hosted parties, multiple levels, etc. First paragraph is context. Scary bit comes later. I don't know WTF happened, but it sounded like this girl found out she was the Karen at this office party. 1 second I am answering questions from the junior staff about our closing hours and procedures. The next second this chick runs past me off like a 15-step staircase like it was a red carpet. She fell about 9 vertical feet onto the landing, had plenty of momentum when she did, and hit the landing wall like a NHL player. I have a literal off-duty police officer on the floor below me. I call him into action on the spot. We might need medics. This chick bounces off the wall and onto her feet before we can give aid. 3 of her co-workers are there to assist her. I think it is all good. Officer downstairs says it looks like her friends/co-workers have it under control. They dumped her on the curb around the block, lied about it on the way back in. We know this because an hour after the entire company party had ended she tried to climb the balcony to get back in. Not a security guard, but I used to work overnights at a dog daycare. We were cage-free so someone had to keep an eye on the dogs 24/7. We had cameras in each room, as well as one on the front of the building, one on the side, and one overlooking the parking lot. The parking lot camera was angled just enough that you could see where the back entrance to the building was, but not the door itself. One night, the buzzer that alerts us a client has arrived went off. This alarm went off all the time during business hours, but not so much after midnight. So I looked up and saw a man walking toward the back door. I had a moment of panic trying to remember if I had locked everything or if this guy was just about to break in. After a moment, nothing happened. The man never reappeared on camera, and the back door never opened. I went back to check. I had indeed locked everything properly. I checked around the windows and saw no evidence of the man. I wanted to confirm he had left, so I went back to the camera footage to see where he might have gone and how I missed it, but I couldn't find any sign of the man reappearing. Only a few frames of him walking up to the back door, and then poof, no trace. I froze the footage on the best frame I could get of the guy, and I swear to God it was me. The clothes were my clothes. The shoes, the hat, everything. Even his hair, posture, approximate height. I obviously couldn't see his face well, but it was like seeing myself on camera. I walked up to the back door the same way I would if I was going to work, and then I disappear, or at least that's how it looked. I'm sure it was just some guy, but where he went after walking up to the building, no idea. Lots of weird things happened on overnight shifts there, but that one sticks out in my mind as one of the more bizarre feeling moments. When I first got into security, I worked in an old hotel that was being renovated. It was originally built in the 1920s. It had a really fancy pool area that got sealed off not too long after the original opening because the original owner's kids drowned in it. It was being used as storage during renovation, so it was on the patrol route. First night there, I go in to take a peek and I heard splashing sounds, laughter, and then a scream followed by a splash. One kid died trying to save the other. I used to do hospital security during COVID, and many people have told me that they've experienced paranormal activity around the hospital. Especially on this one floor where there used to be a psych ward where the scariest ones were at. One housekeeping told me that they saw the ghost while cleaning that floor, and even the pharmacy director experienced the same thing. They said it was the ghost of a male. One of my old co-workers said old hospitals/nursing homes were the creepiest places to work. He tells a story about when he was assigned to an old condemned nursing home. Place was empty and waiting to be torn down. Only people in the building are security. It's his first night there, so the on-duty guard is giving him the rundown before shift change. The security post is set up at what used to be the central nurses station. He hears a ringing behind the desk and asks the other guard what it is. Regular guard says in the old days the patients had a buzzer system to ring the nurse if they needed something. He asks who's ringing the buzzer. Guard tells him all the entrances are secure and there's no one in the building, but the buzzers occasionally go off in the night. I asked him if he ever went to rooms that rang the buzzer, and he said, "Hell no." I wasn't a security guard, but I used to be a custodian at my church in high school. It was an easy job and no one really bothered me. One morning I was making my rounds, and before I had unlocked any of the outer doors, I decided to unlock the worship center doors. This is a big church, so there's about 15 sets of doors around the worship center that all have little windows that look in. The worship center has a baptistry up high above the stage, so everyone can see, and always has a light on it. Well, as I was going through unlocking doors, I looked in through one of the windows, and a dark shadow went right across the baptistry. Scared the shit out of me. I was the only person in the building. I don't think I ever looked through those windows again as I unlocked the building. We never found any evidence of anyone staying and hiding out in the building overnight. On another occasion I was walking through a basement hallway which didn't have the lights on. Maybe it was just me creeping myself out, but as I walked through the hallway I went ice cold and had the feeling that I needed to get out of there. Like something was in that hallway or one of the rooms on it. I thought I was dumb for feeling that way, but other custodians told me they had similar experiences. Could be nothing, but who knows. I wasn't a security man's, but I worked third shift local police for a while. My office was in City Hall. The building was located on Main Street and set up with offices built up several floors along two sides and a large corridor and elevator banks down the middle. Security desk to the left of elevator bank. As you exit elevator bank, you walk straight to the main lobby/metal detectors, then straight out to parking garage. One night, police chase is occurring downtown. Driver turns his car straight into City Hall, crashes through the front, drives high speed through elevator bank corridor, through main lobby, crashes through back glass pane windows, straight up the parking garage ramp. Security man's was like, I dunno, 65 yo? And he had dozed off. Not that he couldn't have done anything to help lol. It was my night off, But I heard the next night several people had literally just gotten on the elevator and doors closed. Had they been in the corridor, they would have been hit by a vehicle at high speed, nowhere to jump, get away. Former security guard. I had to guard an employee parking lot at a factory. I didn't have to stay in the guard booth, so I sat in my car most nights with the occasional visit to the guard booth to break up monotony. The scary part, I was in the guard booth and opened the door and there was a family of skunks directly outside. I had to wait for them to leave while all the while doing the gotta pee dance. I was working at a country bar that does karaoke on Wednesday nights. These nights are bigger than Saturdays. It was a girl's 21st birthday and the DJ kept telling everyone to buy her shots on the loudspeaker. She was already so faded I had to yell at the DJ to stop. Later on I hear that someone is throwing up and it's guess who. I went in and I'm not sure how she fit that much liquid in her tiny little body. Every surface was covered in barf. Every single one. Luckily some of her family was there with her but they had to carry her limp body out of the bar. She was covered in barf and her eyes were rolled back into her head. She looked certifiably dead. I told them to take her to the hospital and I never saw her again. I still think about what might have happened after she left. I may just say this: humans are more scary than ghosts. So I responded to this large school, I believe it was a high school anyways, besides that we got a alarm call so I had to respond since it was my jurisdiction. I pulled up the west exterior of the property. At the time I didn't know that was the main office/entrance of the school, so I radioed it into my dispatcher at the time, let them know of my whereabouts in case shit hits the fan. As I walked alongside the west exterior there was this conference room. I observed the lights on inside so I peeked through the blinds. Nobody was present. As I walked more north I spotted a gate entrance. It was closed, but as I peeked in a little more I spotted a ton of glass on the floor, so red flags starting going up in my head. I called it into my dispatcher requesting for backup and Leo. Luckily one of my trusted coworkers was nearby so ETA was to a minimum. As I was waiting for backup, I kid you not, the same room, conference room I look inside earlier, the lights suddenly turned on. It felt like a movie scene, so I took cover behind our company patrol vehicle. I look and see a portion of the blind open with the lights off. All I saw was a pair of eyes in the darkness. Luckily I wasn't so close by because who knows what this person had on them. Of course I have my gun, but that's not on my mind. Till this day I get chills speaking about this story. So backup arrived and Leo helicopters and officers show up. They take over the scene. So us security and Leo personnel conducted a sweep of the building. So trip out, the person that broke in didn't steal nothing, he just trashed the place really bad, like bad. Didn't take any iPads that were available, cash, or items, just straight trashed the room. No arrests were made and somehow the suspect got away. I have another one of this known person I used to run into a lot. Majority of the times he was very coherent and spoke well, but that's for another time if anyone is interested. Lol. Graveyard shift. Medical building had mannequins that would change to different spots through the night. I cleared every room before locking up and had to make hourly rounds. The mannequins would slowly make their way from the middle of the room to the windows. I was a security guard at medieval times. I had the castle all to myself at night. Well, me and the horses. Walking around there every night was creepy. Especially every time I had to go into the torture room exhibit. Lots of places a killer could hide in there and all the instruments and things were just freaky to see in the middle of the night, surrounded by darkness, with only the occasional creepy horse noises from the stables bellowing out. On the other hand, when I wasn't doing rounds, I watched MASH reruns and played Super Nintendo. When I had just started doing retail security, I was on dispatch. One of the restaurants called us to report that one of their waitresses got a phone call from her ex. During the call, the ex tells her that he was gonna bring a gun to the restaurant, start an incident, possibly shoot some people, and then exit the restaurant and end his life. Supervisor goes over and we call the cops. I remember sitting on the cameras, switching views on our 3 main monitors to at least give these guys early warning in case the dude shows up. I kept having to prioritize views on one side of the main concourse over another, hoping that I didn't miss the guy by plain bad luck. He never showed up, and after about an hour to an hour and a half, the cops all leave. I found out later that the waitress who got the threat received the call at about 5 p.m., then mentioned it to her coworker, then left for the day at 5:15. Before said coworker finally mentioned it to the manager that called us at 5:30. Add to this that the cops didn't show up until about 5:45, And I realized that night that people could be way dumber than I thought. Wow, I actually have one of these to share. Years ago, after being made redundant, I took a job close to home in my old secondary school, high school, and this was before the new modern buildings went up. There had been rumors for many years about tunnels that stretched to a nearby old church. This was super old, the first building in this area of the town, built back in the 14th century. I was a caretaker, mainly emptying bins, delivering supplies, odd bits of maintenance and locking up at night. I was in the late shift with my huge bunch of keys as all the doors had different locks. The new buildings, when they went up, had a lot of master keys. Anyway, I was locking up in winter about 6 p.m. so it was very dark and shadows were everywhere. I came to some of the very oldest parts of the school, where the teacher's common room was. Now the door that led into this pretty large living area type space from a main school corridor was very heavy and weighted so that it always closed by itself. It sometimes needed a hefty push to get it all the way open. I had walked past this door, was going to do my normal route, in another side door, through an office, check an outside door. All the windows, then went back through the weighted door and locked that last. The corridor behind me was all locked up and empty. When I got into the common room, the weighted door was wide open, then as it does, gently closed again. All was silent. I hadn't heard anyone nearby. I looked all around and called out with no reply. All the hairs on the back of my neck were standing on end. I gulped and forced myself to finish my round. I found nobody or any other disturbances. The next day I spoke to my manager about it and he said, "Oh yeah, we've all experienced that," but didn't elaborate further. It never happened to me again, and then the new build went up and this area was all demolished. Never did find out if any tunnels were found. My wife used to be a night security guard for a hospital. Typically she was just there to calm down aggressive men. They calmed down more when a female addressed them, as opposed to the mountain of a man the other guard was. Her route was to go through most of the hospital and make sure nobody snuck off somewhere they weren't supposed to. One shift she was going down a hall that was just used for storage, and a woman 50 to 60 years old, wearing a hospital gown, was having a hushed conversation with herself while staring at a wall. My wife prayed in her head to both calm her nerves and to help stop whatever was going on, and the woman spun on her heels and yelled, "The voices know what you're doing and want you to stop." My wife noped out of there and got the big security guards go get her. One time I had a post at an overstock warehouse for children's clothing. Almost no one ever came during my shift. Swing. The lights were in the back, so to lock up I had to walk through complete darkness. The place also had some openings in the ceiling, so when the wind would blow it sounded kinda like a kid crying. One night on the truck landing, a shit ton of bugs landed and died. Then another group of different bugs came and did the same. It was freaky. Aside from that, it was an easy post. Scariest thing was when a lady came running into my building half naked and screaming. It was a quiet Sunday night, and typically nothing would really happen on those nights. Police ran in after her. Turns out she was on some kind of drugs, but at first I thought she was a ghost or something. Scary in a different way was when a fight broke out in front of my building. It was a Saturday night, and Saturday nights versus Sunday nights were like night and day, no pun intended. Ton of people out getting into a ton of drunken bullshit. Huge brawl breaks out, which was not at all uncommon, except this time, a guy pulls out a pistol and fires a couple shots into the air. People scatter. I ducked behind my desk. Now this was also not the first time someone had done that either. But this time, another guy pulls out his gun, and they have a short little gunfight. Luckily these guys couldn't shoot worth a damn, and nobody was hit. A couple cars and a couple businesses did though. Police come screaming down the street, gunmen take off. But they were both caught later on. My manager had to show the police what our camera caught of it, which was actually most of it. Crazy thing was, the next day I find almost no news about it, save for one short article saying there was shots fired in the area. Many cities will often underreport crimes in areas they consider desirable, and this was right next to a huge tourist spot in my city. Not a guard but story with security guard. Was studying late at a university building and security guard asked me to pack up and go since it was already past closing for the building. The lights were turned off for most part except for egress. I walk out of the room and headed towards the stairs and heard what sounded like a little girl giggling down the hall to my right. Noped down those stairs and was met with the guard. First thing he asked was there a girl with you? I said no. Then left. The guard went to check while I got out. While in parking lot, Only 2 cars, mine and the guards. I have 2. Though not as bad as some of these that I read. First, I'm walking a scientific academic building by myself for the first, making sure it's locked up. I'd been through there before, but with a trainer, who failed to mention that this particular wing of the building has emergency shutters on the outside windows. So I'm walking along, enter this wing through an exterior door that opens out, and start walking the hallway. Above me I hear what sounds like someone walking after they had stepped in spilled but dried soda, you know. This being a science building and me alone on midnights, I start thinking that one of the experiments has escaped and is wandering the building a la Alien, 1979. I sped walked the rest of the building, and it took me 2 to 3 years to realize that when the door shut behind me, it forced air into the building, up the big windows and rattled the shutters. The other time, it was my first midnight Christmas break on campus and the students are gone. We have been asked to patrol the upper floors of the dorms to be on the lookout for water leaks. So I get to the culprit building, ride the elevator up, and step out into the elevator lobby. Now I didn't know this at the time, but this particular lobby has mirrors on either side as you step off. So I start walking. Out of the corner of my eye, I see something moving to my left. I turn to look and see someone standing there. I yelled, before I realized it was my reflection. I chuckle to myself, start walking again. See something moving again out of the corner of my eye, but this time to the right. There was once a man outside the zoo where I worked security for who was wearing a unicorn costume and holding a bouquet of flowers. This was about an hour after we had closed, and he came up to the ticket area asking if he could go inside. I told him we were closed and he just said oh and walked off. There weren't any cars in the parking lot and I saw him start to walk away toward the main road, but at some point, I lost view of him. It takes about 10 minutes to walk to the main road from the park, and it had only been about 2 minutes, so I jumped on my ATV and drove off looking for him. Never saw the dude again. This dude was literally in a very noticeable unicorn costume carrying flowers, and he straight up disappeared. I radioed the rest of staff and asked them if they had seen anyone matching the description, and no one ever saw him again. I was working till midnight, so I was definitely more on edge than usual. Been doing security and bouncing off and on for almost 20 years now. Worst thing? A dude lost a game of pool, so he smashed a pint glass and stabbed the other dude in the eye with it. Stabby guy got hard time. Other dude obviously lost his eye but is alive. Lots and lots and lots of blood. Scary. Had a gun pulled on me. Creepy. I had to do a known haunted school. St. John's School and Chapel in Seattle. Lots of giggling kids. But here's what makes me cool. I got to patrol the new F5 tower. It was built to surround the nearby Baptist church. A building within a building. I also go to Wandersmith Tower. The lobby is made entirely out of Mexican onyx. You can shine a light through it and the imperfections would block the light. One of my go to show off to the tourists. One of my better sites. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.